Hmm.
What are you doing?
I'm envisioning myself sitting on a beach, looking out over Puget Sound, little seals swimming through the water, orcas jumping up in the background. I think all of us have some type of dream like that when you think about Puget Sound. So what would it be like to actually live on Puget Sound in the Pacific Northwest?
Could be amazing. We have so many wonderful waterfront areas, not just Puget Sound, but we have amazing lakes and we have beautiful rivers. And you may be thinking, I really want to get there as soon as I can. But wait, there are some hidden surprises, and those might not be the kind of surprises that you're excited about.
We're Joe and Charity, we're local realtors, and we help people every week just like you make informed decisions about moving to Puget Sound. So let's jump into the surprises.
The first surprise has to do with tides, and what's connected to that is mud flats and water depths. Now, you can call me uneducated, but I really didn't understand how much tides vary. I kind of just thought they're the same every day. The tides in and out at about the same time.
You really think that?
I did. I think maybe because I didn't think about it very much. I never had to, but we bought an investment property on Hood Canal, and that's when I realized, hey, the tides change quite a bit. In fact, we could be there for a week, and some of the days the tide is going to be really high right in the middle of the day, and some of the days the tide is going to be completely out all day long. Some of the days it's going to be up most of the day. Some of the days you're going to have a really steep pitch between low and high, and some of the days you're just going to have a little bit of a swing. It was such a surprise to me that I want to make sure that anybody who is considering buying a property on the Puget Sound realizes how much that can affect your property.
And it's really important to know because it's going to affect your access to the water. If you're used to like a lake to where it's always the same type of level that you have easy access in, easy access off, continually consistent, that's not what to expect when you move on to Puget Sound. You will get out to the water by sludging through what mud way steep. Okay, maybe not, that's a little dramatic, but nonetheless, it just really is inaccessible until the next high tide comes in or some type of half tide that you have easy access through a dock out to the water. So be aware of that because it is really different. Even if you live here and aren't on the water, that cadence can kind of throw you off when all of a sudden like, hey, I don't have water access in the middle of the day when you thought you did. So you kind of have to plan around the tides. Now, I find that profoundly charming because I like the variance. I like the wildlife that comes in and out and is changing the scenery. I think it's really charming. However, you might be surprised and think, that's not charming at all. So it's really important to know that first.
And it's really important to understand how that works in different areas of the Puget Sound because there is actually a bay in Olympia called Mud Bay because when the tide is out, it is just mud. Yeah. But there are properties who are more on the outlying areas of the inlet, and those properties, when the tide goes up and down, they still have sandy beach and they have pretty good access. So when you are looking for a property, you definitely want to understand how it affects that property in particular.
Yep. Sometimes in our region, you'll find where the water drops off rather quickly, so you can have deep water access and for a larger boat that you could get in there. Mm-hmm. And other times, if it's really shallow, like Charity's mentioning, you can't really get into it very much at all. So depending on how you want to use the property, you need to be very aware of the tidal flow and how it affects your specific piece of property.
If you do want to have a boat, you're going to have access to marinas all throughout the Puget Sound. So you don't necessarily have to house it at your house, but if you do want to, then you're going to want to search for a house that has a deep water access and has a dock where you can access that easily.
Understanding tides and how they impact each piece of property is important. However, there is one that I think is a little bit more costly surprise that comes up, and that is specific rules and regulations, either with building on Puget Sound or remodeling homes on Puget Sound.
The first one is Washington Shoreline Management Act, which regulates how close you can build to the high water mark, and it's 200 feet.
Now that's interesting because sometimes people will see a home online and like, hey, wait a second, that is built right over the water or that is built right up to the edge of the water. And some of those things used to be allowed, which no longer are allowed for like new construction. It will also have impact on what type of remodeling that you could do on a property because maybe you found the perfect one. If it had an addition over the front that gets you too close to the water, you might not be able to do it. So a lot of due diligence goes into the property acquisition, especially if you're going to make any type of variance to the property in question.
Another regulation that really secures your property is vegetation protection. You're not going to necessarily be able to chop down any trees you want and remove any vegetation on the shoreline. And that's because that will cause erosion to happen more quickly. And so you may find a piece of property that is on the water, but it already has a big line of trees and you may not be able to actually see the water from your house because you're not going to be able to cut down those trees.
And that also goes along with like finding the perfect piece of property that maybe you want to develop that has wetlands on it. and access to either a lake or Puget Sound or a river, and you think, oh, this would be the perfect spot to build in, and then you discover there's setbacks from that as well, and it makes your footprint of building maybe not even viable for what you're hoping to use the property for. So just keep in mind when you think about the perfect house on the water, you're going to think about the county being a partner in your planning, and it's not just going to be solely up to you because of those regulations that are in place.
In addition to the regulations that affect building a home or renovating a home on the water, you also have regulations in regards to your docks and your bulkheads. So you're going to want to discover all the regulations that can affect your property before you purchase it.
And this leads us to our third surprise and has to do with tidelands. Now, specifically, this is going to be raw land or existing homes that are on Puget Sound. There are things that you'll need to know about how that property truly can be used, especially once you get out into the water.
Yeah, what's interesting to most people who aren't from the area, when they look at property lines for a property that's on the water, you'll actually see your property lines go out into the water. And you think, well, how am I going to use that? Well, those are your tideland rights. And some property lines don't extend. And the reason for that is some people lease out or sell their tideland rights. And you're wondering, why in the world would they do that?
Oyster farming, that is why somebody would want to sell their rights. Now, in the South Puget Sound area, there are over 2,100 acres specifically set aside for sustainable oyster harvesting. And that is a part of the economics in our area. And that is important to know because you might be thinking in your future dream property, you could just walk out your front door at the right time when the tide's in the right spot, go out and pick oysters, and realizing, oh, those don't belong to me. Even though they're 20 feet out in front of your house, they belong to someone else. Or you might be part of a community that has an HOA that has specific limitations on how they can be done. Sometimes you could be sold off commercially. Other times you have HOA communities that won't let that happen at all. So each specific property has a lot of considerations when you consider what type of property you want to use on Puget Sound.
Yeah, and you may be one of those people who wants to have your tideland rights because now you see there's an opportunity to lease that out to somebody else and make money off of it. This is a surprise I don't think anybody from outside of the region would have known about. And if you love oysters, hey, you are definitely going to love living here.
So moving on from tideland surprises, our number 4 is septics and well considerations. And those are some big considerations because they have costly implications.
And we have personal experience with that. Unfortunately, on our waterfront property over the last 2 years, we have spent $50,000 on our septic system.
Yeah, there are a lot of regulations on how you use and dispose of wastewater on Puget Sound or lakes or rivers. And some of these septic systems are very expensive to design. Other ones are a little less expensive, but we want to dive into a little bit so that you're not caught by surprise on a very big bill.
If you have a large piece of property, then there's going to be more room for your septic system and your well. But if you don't, like ours, there's limited space. And when it needs to be redone because it's not functioning properly, there has to be a very expensive system put in. And that's what we ran into.
And what goes along with septic system is wells for the water. Now, some communities have fully hooked up sewers to the public system and have fully hooked up water to the systems. But in the outlying areas, that may not be true. So you have to have either a personal private well or a community well. Those wells have to be set a significant distance from the septic system. So that can impact meaningfully where that could be drilled, how you get water to the property, how big a septic system is on the property, how big the home could be with the number of bedrooms in the system. Matter of fact, we've had several people be surprised that there's this big home that's only a 2-bedroom. And they're like, well, isn't there more room in that house? It's like 4,000 square feet. No, there's not. There's a 2-bedroom septic on that. And those restrictions, depending on how you want to use those properties, could affect you very meaningfully, considering like an Airbnb property, for example, that you might not be able to have as many guests as you thought you could because the septic won't allow it and the county will enforce that.
And a little bit more on wells. If you do indeed have to have one on your property, they can function beautifully for a long time. If you're buying an existing property with a well, you're going to have the opportunity to have that tested before you buy the property. Same thing happens with the septic system. That's going to get pumped and inspected and make sure everything runs smoothly before you buy it. So you don't have to worry about necessarily moving in and having problems, but there is maintenance on both of those systems. And on a well, you're going to want to make sure it's tested regularly to make sure that it doesn't have any bacteria that's not safe for you or arsenic. There are filtration systems that can be added to filter all the bad things out. So it's definitely doable. But for example, I just helped a buyer buy a home that was on a well, and the seller had done so many things to that well to make sure that it was functioning properly, but they never ran an arsenic test. And we ran an arsenic test and the arsenic was too high. So they need to install a specific filter for arsenic to make sure that that's not running through the system. So
yeah, and like Charity said, it's not something to discourage you or dissuade you against a septic or a well property. There are ways to make sure you manage challenges that can come from them and that they last a long time, because septic systems can last 50, 60, 70 years. That is not unheard of. Also, though, they can last a lot shorter if not properly maintained. So just get into an understanding of how to maintain your septic and your well, and you'll be fine.
Surprise number 5 has to do with bank stability and erosion. Now, you are going to have different bank heights in the area. You're going to have no bank, which you just basically walk right into the water. You're going to have medium bank, which a lot of times medium bank has really great access to the water still. You're going to have some stairs down. And then you're going to have high bank. And surprisingly, some of those high bank properties still do have stairs, but holy cow.
It's amazing. You do not need a Stairmaster or elliptical. Just go up and down that thing a couple times a day and you will be fit as a fiddle. That is for sure.
But what can happen, especially on those high bank properties, is a significant amount of erosion. And I have seen stair systems that need to be completely rebuilt because there's been so much erosion. We did mention previously about not cutting down the trees and the shrubs, but even with that, you can have weather-related issues and just generally time that it gives the opportunity for the soil to erode.
Another place where water erosion is something that you need to strongly consider is when you're having a house that's on a river or a creek. Now, once they get down into the city area, have levees and setbacks to really stabilize the water flow. But in rural properties, especially large ones, that river is going to flow far more freely. That being the case, you get some flood water is going to change the course of that river. Now, if the house has a good setback and is up on the hill, you really have nothing to worry about. However, if it is in a little bit more of a flat land and access to the water, flood insurance is going to be something that you need to consider. Historic floods, whether it be 100 or 500-year floodplain, all of those things are going to go into the decision making about what's best for you. But be aware of that so you don't get caught off surprise, and that could be a big one when water comes rushing by.
Yeah, in fact, we just got through a flooding stage and there were thankfully not a lot of people that were affected in our area, but throughout the state, most of the people who were affected by flooding were properties that were on rivers.
So following on the heels of water erosion, let's talk about surprise number 6, and that is maintenance of your home on the water.
Maintenance is going to take different forms depending on what water you are on, if it's lakes, rivers, or Puget Sound. The saltwater, as you know, causes things to age a lot more quickly. So your barbecue is going to get rusty faster, but besides that, so the paint on your home is going to wear faster, and there's just generally more wear on the exterior of your house. And what goes along with the extra maintenance needed is the age of a lot of the waterfront homes in our area.
Yeah, there are a lot of older homes on Puget Sound. That is not something to be scared of necessarily because many owners know how to maintain their home in the saltwater condition. From paint and deck repairs and just general ongoing maintenance that needs to be provided for the property. However, sometimes you'll run into some that are a little dilapidated or they haven't stayed on top of it. And if they haven't stayed on top of it, it can quickly go bad in a hurry. Be aware of what you're getting yourself into. That's why we always recommend you have a home inspector where they come out, they really pick apart the home so that you're fully aware of what you're getting yourself into, because you don't want one of those high maintenance ticket surprises.
With maintenance understood, let's move on to surprise number 7, and that is property taxes and flood insurance. Now, Joe mentioned flood insurance a little bit when he was talking about the rivers, but you will want to find out if you're going to be required to have flood insurance. A lot of times you are going to need it when you are on the Puget Sound, especially if you're in a high bank property. But when we bought our property, it didn't show that we needed it, but the FEMA regulations changed, and so we did need it. And you can always look at a FEMA map online to discover exactly what areas are going to require it.
Another expense that goes hand in hand with insurance is property taxes. So it's not that the property tax on waterfront is higher, it's just the value of the home is higher, so the taxes are higher on waterfront homes. So be aware of that when you're looking into your monthly budget of how much you're going to be able to afford. Sometimes you're thinking, oh, just across the street, it's only this much. And then you realize it's a $200,000 more to be across the street on the water, which is not uncommon for that type of variance between waterfront or water view properties. So be aware of what you're going to be spending on a monthly basis.
So we have surprised you 7 times. And if those surprises haven't made you want to go the other direction, let's talk a little bit about what it feels like to live on these different kinds of waterfront properties.
Now, a lot of times people moving into the area have this idyllic vision of living on Puget Sound itself, and I agree with you. I love the saltwater. I love the tide variations. I love the different type of wildlife that we'll see, from seals and occasionally like an orca out there swimming around. And I love that. That to me is quintessential. Seeing boats out on the water, I love it. However, you might be thinking one of the other 2 options is good. And the wonderful thing is we have a lot of options in each 3 of these categories.
Yeah, the Puget Sound, I would say the feel you get is just peaceful, very tranquil, and very spacious. But if you jump over to a lake, you're going to have a completely different feel. Your houses are going to be generally closer together, and people on lakes lakes generally are there to have a good time. So in the summer, it's going to be noisier. You're going to have music from your neighbor that you can hear. You're going to have the noise of the boats that are nearby. So if you like that activity and just everybody getting together for a good time, then a lake might be perfect for you.
And to go along with that, some of the lakes do have restrictions on boat usage. So not every lake is actually a motorized lake. Sometimes you can only kayak, paddleboard, or canoe around the property. And that's good to know as well, because sometimes you can get a little bit of best of both worlds if you want fresh water as your location for your dream home.
And then you've got riverfront. And this is something that is inspiring to me differently than the other two. But if I could choose, I would have Puget Sound waterfront. And then I would also have riverfronts, because there's something about riverfront that's just so peaceful. I think it's the sound of the river.
It really is. What goes along with the charm of living on a river in the Puget Sound area is a lot of those rivers and creek have salmon and steelhead that run out of them. So every year you can kind of with anticipation watch the salmon come up, watch them fall up in your creek and spawn. It's really just beautiful and charming in that way. And also some of those properties are in rural areas where you're away from people. You have your own little creek or waterfront to your river that no one else is around, and it's very peaceful and tranquil. So many different great options for you to be able to choose from.
After all this, if you still can't decide if you'd rather live on the Puget Sound or a lake or a river, that's where we come in. We are happy to answer any questions that you have and show you properties so that you can get a good feel of what it would be like to live in one of those areas.
So feel free to reach out on the number below. You can give us a call or shoot us a text, or jump on our calendar in the link in the description below. And we're looking forward to helping you make an informed decision of moving into the perfect place for your future.
And if you've enjoyed this video, keep watching, because the next video is going to give you more wonderful information about living in the Puget Sound area.